All right, Penn State 31, Boise State 14. My name is Connor Griffin here to talk about everything that went down in that Fiesta Bowl win for Penn State. They are now 8-0 in the Fiesta Bowl all time. It's incredible. And of course, this win propels them into the college football playoff semifinal, into the Orange Bowl in Miami, and we'll play the winner of Notre Dame, Georgia, which we'll get into that right now. The main reason why I'm recording this today, I'm recording this on New Year's Day. I usually record pretty much right after the game is played. But I decided last night, it's New Year's Eve. I don't know how many people are going to be watching a podcast or listening to a podcast on this night. I'm not going to record it. I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll see how the other quarterfinal games go. We'll see what happens in, Texas, Arizona State, and Ohio State, Oregon. And we'll figure out what the current outlook of the playoff is so that we can get a sense of what Penn State's true path would be to a national championship. Well, obviously, the biggest game today that would have the most immediate impact on our path was Notre Dame, Georgia, considering we get to play the winner of that game in the Orange Bowl. But that game did not happen, obviously. There was the tragedy that went down in New Orleans earlier this morning that really took us all by surprise. And let's face it, in the grand scheme of things, a football game is a far afterthought when it comes to safety, making sure everything's okay down there. It was really, really scary stuff. So I hope everything's situated now. I hope everybody's safe, praying for everybody in New Orleans because, that was some crazy news to get. So they didn't play today. I think as of right now, they're scheduled to play tomorrow at 4 Eastern. So I'll be definitely glued to that. Can't wait to watch. Can't wait to see who Penn State will face in the next round. I'm very curious to see if the next round, if the Orange Bowl gets pushed back a little bit, if that gets impacted by this. But of course, we'll cross that road when we get there. In the meantime, Ohio State cruised and dominated Oregon. Texas almost lost to Arizona State, which was an awesome game. And we took care of business against Boise State. It was a weird game, though. And I say it's weird because it was annoying. There were parts of that game where I was thanking the heavens that we got to watch this iteration of Penn State football because I'd never seen anything like it. Both sides of the ball, just so much fun to watch. Drew Aller came out, lighting it up, throwing balls that are NFL passes. I'm thinking this guy's going to be the number one pick in next year's draft. I can't believe we get to have him as our quarterback. The run game, just running it down Boise's throats. And then on the flip side, their run game with Ashton Genty, the Heisman runner-up, we were really bottling him up. It was so much fun to watch. In that first quarter, I'm like, this is the best Penn State football team I've ever seen. Couldn't believe it. I was over the moon. Then you realize, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. Play calling isn't that great. Penalties, what are we doing? And it was more of a game than it ever should have been. And it was all because of self-inflicted mistakes. For the most part, this game was a 1 or 2 score game for over a half of it. Probably well over a half of it. I'm in the fourth quarter. We're going into the fourth. I'm like, are we going to have to sweat this one out? It was so crazy because of how we looked going into the game, how we looked in the first quarter. I was like, there's no way we should be in this tight of a game with Boise State right now. But we were. So that's why it was irritating. But still, you saw flashes of what we could be in these next 2 games, what we could be next year. But it just didn't come to form fully. So that was the frustrating part of it. And we'll get into all of it. But going back to that first quarter, we go up 14-0. Drew Aller, I want to go to that first drive. The first Boise State drive, I couldn't believe they settled for a field goal. I thought for sure when they had that 4th and short in plus territory, they were going to go for it. They saw like a week and a half ago when we played SMU, how SMU not converting on that touchdown on the first drive really came back to bite them. I thought they would have went for 7, Boise, in this game, and they decided to go for the field goal. They miss it, and from that point forward, oh my God, the Penn State offense was a juggernaut. They took that missed field goal, gave them a bunch of momentum. They just were running it right down Boise's throats, and Katron's getting downhill and making people miss, and Singleton's able to move. It was insanity. I couldn't believe how good the run game looked. And then Drew Aller converts to the back of the end zone with Tyler Warren on an NFL throw that was spectacular. Great grab by Warren, getting a foot down. Then the next drive, we were running the football pretty well again, but it's the deep ball to Amari Evans. That was one of the prettiest passes I've ever seen. Lofted perfectly 50 or 55 yards downfield. And it was plays like that where you just can't help but laugh. and say, how are we so lucky? How are we so lucky to have Drew Aller as our quarterback? So he started off really hot. I think he started the game off like 10 of 13 or something like that. Only finished 13 of 25, though. The passing game really staggered a bit. But eventually, we got back to the run game. I say we got back to the run game, though, and that's what ultimately sealed the game, that 58-yarder by Nick Singleton. The reason why we had to get back to it, though, was because we got away from it. We start that first quarter up 14-0. All systems go. The defense was also just so amazing. And they were really causing havoc for Genty. They force a fumble on Genty, which I was not expecting. Heisman runner-up, he's fumbling the football. We recover. We're about to go up 21-0. And then Drew Aller and Nick Singleton have a bit of a miscommunication at the mesh point. They fumble. We give the ball right back after we had just recovered a fumble defensively. And that changed the entire game. That was the first mistake. That was the first self-inflicted wound where you sit back and you say, damn, we really could have went up 21-0 and pretty much ended the game before we even got to the second quarter. But that gives Boise State some momentum. They're able to put together some methodical drives. They get into the end zone. It's now 14-7. And at one point, it was 17-14. And we could not get back into the swing of things like we were in our first two drives offensively. And you felt like, oh my God, Boise State's hanging around. Like one mistake, like that blown coverage that we had defensively, that led to the wide open touchdown where their tight end just walked into the end zone. Like one more mistake and we could be in real problems here. Thankfully, that never really happened, and we kept the lead the entire way through. Still have not trailed in this playoff through two games. We've been up, and we've held leads for the entire four quarters each game. But still, it was concerning. It was really concerning. And I think what you saw in that second quarter, where it was just night and day compared to the first, we were really struggling offensively, was we start to get away from the run, partially by choice, but partially out of necessity. We really started the offensive line, whether it was false starts, or Sal Wormley had a really, really tough face mask penalty or holding, whatever the case was. We kept moving ourselves back. I think there were also a couple times where either we had plays that were super long developing and the Boise State pass rush just was able to get to us and they were blitzing like crazy, which we knew was going to be a case coming in. They blitz a ton and they get after the quarterback a ton. Or maybe it was just that Drew wasn't making the right read. I thought that was a little bit off yesterday after that hot start. He really struggled, picking up the pressure and figuring out where the best route was to go quick with the football. So we were getting sacked, we were getting penalties, and we just kept moving further and further back, which of course makes it harder to really get the run game rolling because we're behind the sticks, we're off schedule. And I think we got away from Katron specifically, but also Nick in that second quarter, and the pass game just was not working. That being said, we did still wind up in a situation late in the second quarter going into halftime. I think at this point it was 14-7. Yeah, 14-7. Could have made it 21-7. Drew Aller had finally gotten back to being comfortable. He's poised, and he's leading us down the field with like a minute left to go before halftime. And it would have been such a huge momentum swing to score, get in the end zone right there, and then get the ball to start the second half. And he's throwing dots. I mean, he's putting it right on the money to Amari Evans, to Harrison Wallace, and then even to Tyler Warren. And they wound up being drops. Not saying that these were easy catches. I tweeted this too. These were not easy catches. These were contested balls, but they were placed exactly where they needed to be by Drew Aller. And if we had one stud receiver, one of those would have been a play. They would have made a play, and they would have gotten us into the end zone. Amari Evans dropped the ball in the end zone. Harrison Wallace dropped the ball in the end zone as well. Tyler Warren, which this was a shock, he dropped the ball when it could have gotten us to like the one, and then we could have very easily punched it in on the very next play. These were catchable balls, and we just didn't come through with them, even though Drew was placing them right on the money. And I was that moment where I'm like, I feel so bad for this guy. We've spent so much of his career where he just doesn't have a number one receiver. And Tyler Warren has been a godsend, and Tyler Warren, in my eyes, did make up for it a lot later on in the game when he got the touchdown. That was just an insane grab. He elevates and he puts us up 24-14. But he even had some plays yesterday that typically he makes, and he didn't make them yesterday. So I think Drew, just a bit scattered. Didn't have the full help from his receiver core, and I think in that game specifically, going up against a Boise State pass rush that prioritizes like just blitzing. It's very feast or famine. I think is how somebody, an analyst, I think it was Josh Pate, described it. Feast or famine. It's either they get to the quarterback or they're screwed. They're just going blitz, blitz, blitz. And there were points in that game yesterday, specifically in the second quarter, where we couldn't handle it. Nick Dawkins a couple times, I think, really struggled at the center position to pick up the blitz and make sure that Drew stayed protected up the middle. It was tough to watch. And I think in that game, it definitely affected Drew. That being said, I do think it was great for Drew to get this experience. I think all of this is great. Just a side note before I get back into the game specifically. The fact that this team, and specifically Drew Aller, as your starting quarterback and who's going to be your starting quarterback next year, the fact that this team has been able to go on the road and get 2 come-from-behind wins, one against USC and one against Minnesota, both in the Big Ten, in really, really challenging environments, partially challenging environments because they put themselves in those environments and they got themselves behind, but still, come-from-behind wins that were awesome. The fact that this team got to go to a Big Ten championship and face the number 1 team in the country, the only unbeaten team in the country at that point in time, that was great experience. The fact that now this team has had 2 playoff games under their belt is massive for experience. It's game reps, it's more practice, everything. And for Drew Aller specifically in this game to be blitzed that much and for him to be able to learn from it, yeah, he didn't handle it all that great in certain moments, but for him to assess the tape now and figure out what he did wrong, what he could do better, like that is so priceless. And you can't put a value on that. I can't wait to see how he rebounds from it. I think he's rebounded really, really well a lot this year. I think Kotelnicki has also rebounded well a lot this year. And I do think Kotelnicki does have to really evaluate his play calling after this one. And that's a big part of the reason why this game was a bit frustrating. I talked about how we had to get away from the run game, partially by choice, but also because of just situationally. We put ourselves in bad scenarios and we couldn't really run the football. They weren't running downs. But when you did get a running down, like a 3rd and 1, run the football. Kaytron Allen is almost, there were points in the game, I think he had like 8 or 9 yards of carry. He finished with around, I think, 7.8 or 7.9. It was the Kaytron Allen game. He was getting whatever he wanted to. Give him the football. He's feasting, and this defense can't stop him. We're doing these cutesy pass plays where we're dialing up, we're going to toss it to Tyler Warren or whatever the case is. Tyler Warren's going to be under center. We're going to toss it to Drew, and then he's going to throw it back to Tyler. It's not there. Fake bootleg. We're going to try and throw it to Khalil Dink. He's not open. Run the football. It's 3rd and 1. We just got way too cute and way too outside of ourselves, and we lost sight of what got us the lead in the first place. For Boise, defensively, there's that old adage, you need to earn the right to rush the passer. Meaning, you need to stop the run game first. You need to make sure that those running backs are in check. You're forcing the other team, the opposing offense, into obvious passing situations, and then you can rush the passer. I don't think we made Boise State, earn the right to rush the passer. I think for the most part, we kind of just gave them that right. We said, yeah, we're not even going to run the football. And we're going to, drop Drew back and in turn put Drew in some really precarious situations where he's getting all these blitzers on him. Well, if we had just stuck with the run, then Boise State, they would have had to have played more honest. And they wouldn't have been able to blitz as much, and it would have been much more difficult for them to get to Drew Aller. But it was really strange, the whole approach. And yeah, there were very obvious situations where you're thinking, this should be a run. And it just was not a run. I don't know if, Kotelnicki was trying to be too smart and trying to outsmart Boise State defense. I don't know. I really don't know what it was. But that seems to be the general consensus from a lot of national pundits after this game. Like, dude, Andy Kotelnicki, run the football. Kaytron Allen, that was the best game he's ever played. This run game as a whole, too. And I want to give Kotelnicki credit for this. It was strange, though, because if he did reinvent this run game, then why are we not sticking with it when it's working? I don't know. We found something out in the run game. And I wish we were able to know what the main attribute of it is, why we're seeing this rapid improvement over the course of the last 3 games. But I remember the Minnesota game, and I tweeted this too. The Minnesota game, I don't think Katron Allen got a single touch in the first half. We had 10 yards total rushing in that first half of that game. Like, we struggled running the football against Minnesota, and that was the second to last week of the season. Then all of a sudden, we come out in the Big Ten Championship game, and Nick and Katron are just running over everybody. Averaged over 8 yards a carry that game. Last game, even though we had no passing attack, and SMU knew that we were going to run the football, and SMU also on paper had the fourth or fifth best rushing defense in the country, we were still getting 6 yards a carry. Nick and Katron still were going off. And in this game, yesterday, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are getting, 221 yards combined? It was insane. We were just chewing up grass. The Long Boys were just getting yardage and yardage. And I want to give Cole and Nicky credit for all of a sudden just like totally rejuvenating this run game. But if you rejuvenated it and it's working, don't get away from it. It was very, very odd. So that was the one specific one that stood out in my mind. Like, it's 3rd and 1. It was right after Zachy Wheatley had an interception, and it was a real turning point in the fourth quarter, and we could have extended a drive offensively and took so much time off the clock, or maybe punched it into the end zone and just sealed the game right there. But instead, we have this 3rd and 1 pass play, and we have to punt the ball away right after we just had this massive interception. Like, it was a dud, and it was one of those things where you're looking at the game and you're saying, how is it this close? But still, yeah, you wind up with a 17-point win, just like last week against SMU. I thought last week it was like a C-plus effort from Penn State as a whole, and we still won by 28. So what are you going to do? I don't know. I think we're seeing that this team is learning and making mistakes. It's a team and players that have never been there before, coaches who have never been there before at this level, trying to figure out what works, and that's what the beauty of these first two games has been. And it's part of the reason why the draw was so beneficial for Penn State, is that we're clearly the better team in these first two games. Whether it's SMU or Boise State, like, we're just better. And there's a reason why we've been as heavy favorites as we have been. We've been able to learn and try things out and see what works and grow and make mistakes. And I hope that we're able to get that all cleaned up for next week in the Orange Bowl. Because, yeah, there have been other teams, Ohio State, for example, who they have to play an SEC team in Tennessee, and then they have to play the number one team in the country, Oregon, a team who already beat them this year, to start off, and there's really not much margin for error. Now, clearly, they didn't need any margin for error. They've dominated both those teams. But for us, we have to figure out, how to minimize those mistakes and how to minimize those growing pains, because there isn't much margin for error anymore. There was against SMU and Boise State. Now there isn't. So, yeah, offensively, just a bit of a weird game. Tyler Warren, the 2 touchdown catches were absurd. And it's just, again, something you sit back and you think, yeah, this is awesome. It's awesome that we get to see Drew Aller, maybe the best Penn State quarterback that we've ever seen, throw it to Tyler Warren, who is by far the best tight end I've ever seen at Penn State. Beautiful. And one thing that you have to give Cole and Nicky credit for, even though, yes, it was a bit odd yesterday in his play calling and when he chose to dial up certain plays, he's still finding a way since the Ohio State game to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers. And I think just like he learned from the Ohio State game a lot, he's going to learn a lot from this one, and hopefully we come out with a much better game plan and much better decision-making against Notre Dame or Georgia. So that's pretty much all I had to say offensively. Defensively, I was really, really pleasantly surprised with how much they were just able to cause havoc for Ashton Jeanty. He still finished with 104 yards, but on 30 or 31 carries, not even averaging 4 yards a carry, like, that was exactly the plan. Yeah, they're going to feed him the ball consistently. They're going to give it to him, 25, 30 times, maybe even 35 times, whatever the case was. But if you could, keep him bottled up where he's not going off for, 50 or 60 like Nick Singleton did at the end of the game, as long as you're keeping him from those big explosive plays, you'll be fine. And thankfully, that's what happened. Now, I was not expecting Maddox Madsen to have as good of a game as he did. I rattled off Drew's stat line. I think it was 13 of 25 for 171 yards. Maddox Madsen had over 300 yards passing. And up until those 3 interceptions late, I was thinking, oh my God, he's having a really good game. And he was able to keep Boise State in it, even though we did such a good job of swarming Jeanty and gang tackling Jeanty and just getting him down to the ground, even though that dude, I don't know how he does it. His durability is insane. He is so hard to bring down. Just watching him, it's like, oh my God. But still, Maddox Madsen was able to do it. And I think it's concerning slightly for this defense because you want to say, oh, well, it was just a weird game and those receivers were open because they were selling out on the run and trying to stop Genty. But the receivers that were open last night traditionally have been open against this defense all year. Those slant routes, those quick curls, especially when we dial up a blitz, you'd expect the corners then be really pressing against the receivers, tight coverage. They were playing pretty soft, and Madsen was able to evade a sack and get it to receiver. That stuff has been open all year against Penn State, and specifically the one blown coverage play to the tight end, where, there was nobody around him. That was a play. Another person, it might have been another PFF podcast, I don't know. They pointed out that was a play that Ohio State ran against us. Something similar to that. It was like an offshoot of that play. And Ohio State, it was open for them, and it was even more open for Boise State in this one. So there are things being exploited in this defense. Part of the reason why Oregon put up 45 on us. Yes, there are times where we look like Herculean, like the best defense you've ever seen, and we're just all over the field and we're hitting hard and it's great. But there are certain weaknesses to this defense for sure, and better teams down the line, I think, will absolutely find a way to take advantage of those. So that part worried me, the fact that Madsen was able to really get going in the pass game. But later on, once we had completely taken Genty out of the game, and now, Boise State's down by 10, and they're really trying to move the ball through the air, that's when you get them in obvious passing situations, and it is going to be difficult for Madsen to beat this Penn State secondary. Sure enough, Zachy Weekley comes up with a pick. Who else was it? Zion Tracy came up with one. Tyrese Mills came up with one. I want to say it was Tracy. But yeah, 3 picks in that fourth quarter. Just boom, boom, boom. And that's where this defense just came to life as the bullies, the true bullies that I know that they can be, where they were shutting down Genty, they're picking off Madsen, and they looked awesome. So, again, some concerning stuff about this defense, but overall, Denai Dennis Sutton had himself a day. Amin Vanover had himself a day, and this group as a whole. Also want to give credit to Zane Durant. He's been, exceptional almost every single game this year. Just doesn't get talked about enough because of his position. But as a whole, this defense was spectacular yesterday, specifically when it came to the main objective, which was shutting down Ashton Genty, which they did. Abdul Carter obviously got injured. There was also a point in the game where Jalen Reed got injured, and I'd argue that those are probably the two most important people on this defense. But thankfully, Jalen Reed was able to get back up, and he seems to be all right. Abdul Carter, it was his arm. I think it was his left arm. Still no update on that. The fact that he wasn't put into a sling and he wasn't, taken to the locker room. He was still up on stage celebrating with the team. He's in high spirits. James Franklin was on game day today saying that he was walking around the hotel all jolly and happy and everything. So you hope that he's going to be okay for January 9th when we go to Miami. But that is a major problem if he's not available. Because now, the competition's going to pick up. Competition's definitely going to pick up, and we need him to be the game wrecker that he is. So we'll see. But overall, just a great job by that defensive line of filling in his absence and filling that void. Because, there was never a moment where Ashton Genty just ran all over us. He was contained the entire game. So kudos to them. And I'm trying to think. I wrote down other notes about the game because that's one of my favorite things I love doing during these big games is I love taking notes and just figuring out my thoughts on the game as it's happening and writing it down. Really, I think just that's pretty much it. Really, I just think that the fumble in that first quarter changed everything. The fumble by Aller when he's trying to hand it off to Nick, or is he trying to keep it? We don't know. That changed everything, and from that point on, it opened the door for Boise State to get back into the game. But thankfully, we were able to keep them away and seal the game up late in the fourth quarter, again, with that awesome Nick Singleton run. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the game. And I guess from there, we'll get into the road ahead. Again, playing the winner of Notre Dame, Georgia. I'll touch on the other games today. Texas, Arizona State, by the way. A lot of people have deemed Penn State's path way too easy. They don't deserve it. Well, Of course, they're going to win these games. They're not big games. They're not against big-time opponents. Who cares if James Franklin and Penn State, if they beat SMU and Boise State? It's a rigged Mickey Mouse path. As of right now, Penn State has won their playoff games by a combined score of 69-24. I think that's what it is. 38-10 in that first game against SMU, and that's even misleading because it was 38-3 before we put in our backups defensively. And then last night, 31-14. And you look at a game like Texas-Arizona State today. Texas was, I think, 12.5 or 13.5 point favorites. Had a big-time lead in that game, and then let Arizona State come all the way back to tie it, and then they have to go to double overtime just to beat Arizona State. And Cam Scatterbo is just like this all-world, generational player. That has never been an issue for Penn State in this playoff. So when you see a team like Texas with all that talent, Texas was the betting favorite to win it all coming into today. When you see that team really struggle against an inferior opponent, much inferior opponent, you got to give credit to Penn State and what James Franklin has been able to do with this team. There is a lot of pressure on Penn State right now because of the path that has been laid out in front of them. I think they realize, we got it pretty good, as ideal as you could get, which means we cannot screw this up. And there has been this monkey on James Franklin's back, he can't win against, top 10 teams, whatever. Well, he's beat 2 top 10 teams now. You could disagree about whether or not they should be top 10 teams, but the fact of the matter is, they're top 10 teams. James Franklin has not only won both these games, but you look at the scoreboard, he's won convincingly. Can't say the same about Texas today. So just that needed to be said. You have to give credit to James Franklin and to Penn State because they have been so locked in and they haven't even come close to playing their best game yet. I thought yesterday, if SMU was like a C+ performance, I'd give this like a B- yesterday. They haven't played their best game yet. Drew Aller hasn't played his best game yet. And who knows? If you put all the pieces together and you treat each game with the level of attention and detail that it requires, I don't think you can count Penn State out at all to win the whole thing. Now, the other game is the Ohio State-Oregon game, which was an utter beatdown that I don't think anybody saw coming. That game at one point was worse than Georgia-TCU. TCU, there was at least a moment where in that first half, there was some hope. They scored a touchdown. They got on the board. Up until the final seconds of the first half in that game today, 34-0? Oregon couldn't do anything, and Ohio State was just, obliterating them. I couldn't believe my eyes. And I tweeted, I said, this is the best college football team that I've ever seen. When Ohio State is playing to their full potential, I don't know how you beat them. The money that they spent on this team, the receivers that they have on the outside. Will Howard has suddenly come to life and is this incredible deep ball passer. The running backs are still the running backs. And the main thing is, because I had some people saying what about, this team? What about that team? This Ohio State defense gets nowhere near enough credit for being as astounding as they actually are. It's one of the most underrated parts of the team, even though it's an entire, unit. It's one of the three faces of the, I don't feel like anybody really talks about the defense. We talk about Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and Will Howard. We don't talk about the defense. This defense is filthy. And I don't see how, if they're playing at their best, how anybody could beat them. That's why coming into today, they were the favorite in this game. And there's ever since the Michigan game, they figured something out, and they're just clicking on all cylinders. And this game today was a rout. Even though, yes, Oregon kind of came to life in the third quarter. Game was over. It's 34-8 at halftime. Stop it. So, that being said, there's a very good chance if Penn State beats Notre Dame or Georgia that we would play in the national championship against Ohio State, because I don't see how Texas beats them. And to be totally honest with you, I might have said this before. It sounds crazy, but I would love to see Ohio State in the national championship game. And I say that not because I think we would win, or that I think we got our best shot is against Ohio State. No, clearly there are other teams in this playoff who I would have rather faced than Ohio State in terms of talent in terms of the better matchup, who I think we could really beat. But in terms of the narrative and in terms of the monkey that's been on James Franklin's back, as I said, I talked about the monkey, but he can't beat top 10 teams. The monkey of he can never beat Ohio State. He can never beat Ryan Day. If you got the opportunity to compete for a national championship and it's against the team that you've struggled with for 8 years now to beat, you haven't beat them since 2016. If you could kill two birds with one stone, where not only can James Franklin win a big game, but it's the biggest game of them all, and it's against an opponent that nobody thinks he could ever beat, like that would be so poetic and so awesome. I think just in general, a Penn State, Ohio State national championship would be really cool. Big Ten rivals, and again, the history of it and the fact that those games traditionally have been pretty good. This year's game was pretty good. We've had some great games in the past. Like, it's close, it's tight, these teams know each other, and I also think the fact that we have never played them twice in a year before could really factor into our advantage. It could also factor into their advantage as well. They beat us already, and maybe they found even more stuff on tape that they could exploit. But I think, again, going back to learning from mistakes, whether it's Drew Aller or Andy Kotelnicki or James Franklin, like learning from it and taking that first game against Ohio State this year and fixing the strategy and trying with another tactic, another game plan, trying that out, I think it'd be really interesting. So I would love to see Ohio State in the national championship. And I know people are going to say you're crazy, or why would you say that? When Penn State gets smacked by Ohio State 35-0, I bet you won't love to see them then. It's not like that. I think it would be an amazing chance to change the narrative, and especially after what Ohio State has done. I mean, hanging over 40 on Tennessee, blowing them out, hanging over 40 on Oregon, blowing them out, just insanity. They are looking like the best team I've ever seen right now. And we'll see exactly what comes about. I think the beauty of this playoff, though, and I guess we'll wrap up with this. The beauty of this playoff is the fact that it gives teams a second chance. Beforehand, Ryan Day, well, he still does. Beforehand, Ryan Day had a Michigan problem. As I said, he still does have a Michigan problem. But in the past, in the 4-team playoff, if you lost that game to Michigan, it meant that you weren't playing in a Big Ten championship. Ryan Day has not won a Big Ten championship since COVID. It means most likely you're not making it into the playoff. Now, there was the 1 year where Ohio State and Michigan both made it in still after Ohio State had lost to Michigan in the game. But, think about the offshoot effect that one game has. Ryan Day has a Michigan problem. He's losing out on Big Ten championships. He's losing out on playoff appearances, chances to win a national title. Now, he's still lost to Michigan this year, but because of the 12-team playoff, he still gets a chance to go out and compete. And you see, Ohio State's still really good. They just have a Michigan problem. With Penn State, James Franklin has a Ryan Day problem. He has never beat Ryan Day. But unlike in years past where you lose against Ryan Day and you lose against Ohio State and you're missing out on the Big Ten championship and you're missing out on the playoff, like now you are getting an opportunity, and it actually worked out this year too, where they still got to go to the Big Ten championship even with that Ohio State loss. But still, you're getting the opportunity to redeem yourself, and you're getting the opportunity to show, hey, yeah, we can't beat Ohio State, but look at how we dominated SMU. Look at how we dominated Boise State. Now we're going to get a chance to play a real, legit opponent, whether it's the SEC champ in Georgia or 11-1, 12-1 Notre Dame. You're getting the opportunity to prove, hey, we might have a problem with this team, but otherwise we're pretty solid. And now, because of the expanded field, we have a different path of getting back to where we need to be. And who knows, if we win this next game against Notre Dame or Georgia and we get a chance to fix that problem, and James Franklin can wipe away that Ryan Day problem and we hoist a trophy because of it, that would be amazing. So I'm feeling really, really good, and this has been such a fun time of year. We get a month, essentially, of Penn State playoff football. Penn State football is playing meaningful games in January, deep into January, and it's awesome. It's incredible to see. So very much looking forward to Thursday the 9th in Miami, and we'll see exactly who we get to face. I'll be tweeting, I'll be posting, I'll be doing a bunch of stuff in the next week or so. Yeah, I guess like a week and a day leading up to that game. So follow me on social media. Stay tuned to the channel. I'll be talking about that game after it's done, and I'll be just loving life, watching Penn State football in the college football playoff in the semifinal. One win away from going to a national championship. It's unbelievable. So very thankful, very grateful for all of you. Love you all. We are. Until next time, this has been Connor Griffin signing off. Peace.